Good evening. It's good to see you all this evening. Thanks for being here. A little bit questionable weather outside, but we have a good, comfortable place to assemble and study together, and that's a blessing. We're continuing our studies. We're getting near the end, but we're continuing our studies on Wednesday night about the miracles of Jesus. And tonight, we got 5 different episodes that we want to look at. And so we'll have to kind of move along to make sure we can cover it all. The first one is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but let's concentrate on Matthew's account initially. Matthew chapter 12, beginning verse 9. Matthew 12, verse 9. When he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered, and they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days, that they might accuse him? And he said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. Then saith he to the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Okay, so this happened several times. This is not a unique case where there was a situation on a Sabbath day, and the Jewish elite always were looking for a chance to catch Jesus in one way or another, and so they actually put this to him. He was in there. Verse 9 says that he departed thence, he went into their synagogue. So this is the Sabbath day, and he went in to the synagogue where they would be assembled to read the scriptures, to talk about spiritual things. And yet when he went in, and them knowing who he was, they specifically asked him, there was this man there with a withered hand. First of all, we might talk about what a withered hand might be. Well, it could have been any kind of crippling thing. It could have been an injury that left his hand crippled. It could have been a birth defect that caused him to have a crippled hand. It could have been some disease that he was afflicted with. We don't know. It just says his hand was withered. And so you take from that he didn't have functioning use of his hand for one reason or other. They're going to use this guy as a chance to accuse Jesus. When he's aware that they actually ask him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Now, this is the question that comes up. Was it a technical violation of the Old Testament Sabbath law to heal on the Sabbath day? Well, how would you be able to prove that from the Old Testament law of Moses? Now, the Old Testament law of Moses had certain restrictions on things that could and could not be done on the Sabbath day. We know that's true. But what we're also aware of is that by the first century, the Jews had fabricated a whole lot of elaboration on the Sabbath law. And so they had added a lot of their own specific traditions, and they were binding them as if they were in the Old Testament law of Moses. And so they were very adamant about that. So Jesus is going to heal on the Sabbath day. Has he violated the Sabbath day? Well, I think you'd have a hard time finding any statement in the Old Testament scriptures that would even come close to suggesting that be a Sabbath violation. All he did was, notice, all that he did, he told the man, hold out your hand. He didn't even touch him. That's all that Jesus said. Hold forth thy hand. Stretch forth thy hand. He stretched it forth, and it was restored whole like that. He didn't touch the man. He said those 3 words, 4 words, stretch forth thy hand. That's supposed to be a Sabbath violation? I'd like to see someone prove that using the Old Testament law of Moses in Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. Prove that. It's not provable. Wade.
I think that if I was in those times and I saw a man do that, I would be afraid to challenge it.
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd be the one that's running back and saying, we need to put that guy in jail. Stay away from that guy. I mean, he's doing stuff that I'm scared of, you know?
Yeah, I know. But this is how blinded they were, because this was affecting their power base.
Yeah.
As he becomes more popular, they lose power.
In their pocketbook.
And their pocketbooks, exactly right. And so that was the issue. Now, what about this? So the whole situation, I think this is interesting. Go to Mark's account real quick in Mark 3. In Mark's account, Mark 3, verse 1, he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand, and they watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. He said to the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they held their peace. Notice verse 5. And when he had looked round about them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said, stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. I've actually highlighted that in my text there, where it says Jesus looked upon them with anger. Is it always wrong to be angry? No. There is such a thing. We usually describe it as righteous indignation. There are some things that you should be angry about. You should be angry about people like these, who are so wedded to their position and power that they don't even want this man healed of an infirmity, and they're grasping at some straw to accuse Jesus of doing wrong. Wade?
We know Jesus had an ultimate goal of dying on the cross. We know he did. But do you think, I mean, Jesus could have healed any day of the week. He didn't have to choose the Sabbath to heal. Do you think Jesus purposely did this to anger these people?
I don't know how you'd answer that. I don't know how you'd be able to, I don't think there's an answer to that, Wayne.
I think he purposely healed on the Sabbath just to tweak their
You think he did?
just to make, not to do it out of spite, but to get them to think about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because time after time after time, he healed somebody on the Sabbath.
He healed on the Sabbath, but then you'd also say, but the Sabbath day was when people were together. I just think it'd be a little hard. I think we could speculate, but it'd be pretty much speculation. We couldn't prove it, what he was up to, or whether he had intentionality in the matter. Now let's go back to Matthew 12. And the question that this text raises is Jesus justifying situational ethics? Now, you know what situational ethics are, right? So, usually, according to situational ethics, usually it'd be wrong to tell a lie. But in a certain situation, you might have to tell a lie to maybe protect somebody or keep from hurting somebody's feelings. So, right and wrong are determined by situations. That's situation ethics. And there's all kinds of examples, and they can get far more extreme than that. But that's what situation ethics says, is that the right and wrong is determined by the circumstance. So Jesus brings up in verse 11, Matthew 12:11, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into the pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? So, is Jesus justifying situation ethics here, or is there another explanation? I'm going to say there's another explanation. The other explanation is he's drawing out their hypocrisy. They're rank hypocrites. If they had a sheep and it fell into a pit on a Sabbath day, you better believe they'd pull it out, because again, that gets into their pocketbook. That gets into their money. And he said, you would pull a sheep out of a pit on a Sabbath day, and you're criticizing me for just saying, stretch forth thy hand? So I don't think he's justifying them. He's not saying it's okay to pull a sheep out on the Sabbath day. I think he's saying, you all do that and don't and you excuse yourself. what hypocrisy you're guilty of to accuse me when all I've done is heal a man. I haven't done any work. I've just healed a man. There's no literal work involved in this. So I think the only reason he brings that up is to draw out their hypocrisy. And then notice he actually says at the end of verse 12, wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. Jesus is saying, what I have done is lawful. What I have done is not a Sabbath day violation. I think it's interesting that just earlier in verse 8 of this text, Jesus had said the Son of the Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. And I think what Jesus is saying, don't be telling me about the Sabbath law. I wrote the Sabbath law. Don't be trying to tell me what's right and what's wrong on the Sabbath day. I'm the author of the Sabbath law, by the way. And so, clearly Jesus did not violate the Sabbath law. And I think the only reason he brings up drawing the sheep out of the pit is to say, you all do that and you're big hypocrites. Wayne, do you have a thought?
Yeah, what they had done is they had perverted the Sabbath so that the Sabbath ruled over man. Instead of man having a rest and a respite from the toils of his labors on the Sabbath, which was designed for him.
Yeah.
It wasn't designed to lord over man.
Instead of making it a blessing, they had actually made it a curse.
They used it as a weapon to beat somebody up, whether it was Jesus or somebody else. The man that Jesus healed, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, pick up your pallet and go home. Yeah. He was criticized because he picked up his pallet.
Yeah. And a lot of it goes to what we were saying earlier. They had just erected this hierarchy of Sabbath rules that weren't in the law. And I think, again, Jesus is saying, don't be telling me about the Sabbath law. I wrote the Sabbath law. You can't tell me. You can't correct me on Sabbath day restrictions or Sabbath day regulations because I know them. I wrote them. But I think he brings out about drawing the sheep out on the Sabbath day. You guys do that. And by your own words, you condemn yourself, but you're so hypocritical in this. So I think that's why he brought that out. But I do think it's kind of interesting and worth noting there in Mark's account, in Mark 3, verse 5, that Jesus was angry. And so it's not wrong to be angry when people are like these, when they're acting hypocritical. This is righteous indignation. I think anger is a thing we got to be on guard about for sure, but there is some legitimate reasons why a person would be angry. Jesus was. All right, any other thoughts on that account? We're going to get a couple more here that are not too much different. Let's go to Luke 13. I always think it's interesting in these cases of physical infirmities when Luke records them. Luke's a physician, so Luke knows something about medical issues. Luke 13, beginning at verse 10, he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bowed together, and could in no wise lift up herself. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him, and said unto her, Woman, thou art loosed from thine infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified God. And the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and said to the people, There are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them therefore come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. The Lord then answered him and said, Thou hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or his ass from the stall, and lead him away to water? And ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound lo these 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were ashamed, and all the people rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done. All right, so this woman had been suffering, verse 16 says, for 18 years with a spirit of infirmity, some kind of infirmity. And the manifestation of the infirmity was she was bowed over. She couldn't straighten herself up. And when Jesus healed her, she was immediately made straight. She could stand up. She could stand straight. Now, Again, it doesn't give us any more information than that, but I don't think that that's that hard for us to physically, or maybe visually recognize, because we've seen people who in their old age just get completely hunched over and can barely make their way because they're so bowed over and they can't straighten up. And so it could have been, what would that be, Ricky? Arthritis or worse? Probably worse. What is it sometimes when you see old people and they get all stooped over like that? Is it osteoporosis maybe? Yeah. So, but you see, even to our day, you see people who are in that condition. And she had been for 18 years. And so there's been a long thing. And notice she was immediately made straight. Verse 13 says, pretty impressive, pretty amazing. That just wouldn't happen. I'm just telling you, that wouldn't happen. Even in our day and time, you take a person who's in that physical condition, all, humped over. There's no fixing that typically. And even if you could do something to help, it wouldn't make you straight immediately and be completely cured of it. This is obviously a true miracle. The ruler of the synagogue again is angry because this happened on a Sabbath day. Again, I think they're really hard pressed to try and prove that this constitutes work. His issue is, he says, there are 6 days in which men ought to work. And therefore he's saying, this is work. What Jesus has done is work. I don't know. Would you agree with me that when they make this accusation, they're grasping at straws? They just don't have any. They don't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. They don't have anything that they can legitimately criticize him about. So they're just flailing away. And so verse 14 says he answered with indignation. He's indignant about what Jesus has done. Here, Jesus does the same thing that we saw in the previous one, verse 15. He calls him a hypocrite. Does not each one of you on the Sabbath day loose his ox or his ass from the stall and lead him away to watering? Well, wait a minute. You tend to your animals on the Sabbath day, right? You feed them, you water them. How is this? And he calls this woman a daughter of Abraham. She's been bound by Satan for 18 years with this spirit of infirmity. You're okay with leading your ox to the water, but you're upset because this woman has been made whole? What hypocrisy you're guilty of. And that's why he brings that up, is just to expose the hypocrisy. By the way, there's something a little bit interesting there in verse 16. Ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound, lo, these 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? I think it's interesting that Jesus puts the blame for her physical condition on Satan. I think there's a really important takeaway on that. So we get sick, or maybe even worse, some loved one gets real seriously sick. What do people often say? Why is God doing this? Isn't that unfortunately an all too often reaction? Why is God doing this? Jesus said that this woman was suffering because of what Satan was doing and had done. And really, if we go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, everything on earth was perfection until Satan got his work, got his thumb in the pie, so to speak. And so for all of human suffering, if you want to point a finger of blame, point it at Satan. And I think that's a pretty good verse that helps us come to that conclusion. Satan is ultimately responsible for all of this. Anybody have a thought, Wayne?
Yeah, just a fleeting thing. What they had to do to loose and to take their animals, they had to physically go out, physically work.
Yeah.
To take care of their animals on the Sabbath, which they had no problem with. But Jesus didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And immediately she was well. I mean, no physical labor, nothing involved in it at all. Yet they criticized him when they were actually doing the work on Sabbath.
Yeah. You know, there seems to be a trend of that. Very often, the people who are offering criticism are criticizing what they themselves are guilty of. And that's very exactly true here. Anybody else have a thought? All right, let's go to the next one, also in Luke, in the next chapter, 14. Luke 14. Luke 14, verse 1. It came to pass, as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. And behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. And Jesus answering spake unto the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? And they held their peace. And he took him and healed him and let him go. And answered them, saying, Which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they could not answer him again to these things. Again, Sabbath day. Now this one, I'm going to say, I hadn't really thought about this, Wade, but I'm going to say this one hints at what you were suggesting. It actually suggests that he's almost like he's taunting them with this question. When he spake to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? It's almost like he's kind of taunting them. Say something. I just dare you to say something. I'd just like to see you criticize this, almost, is sort of the way that reads. By the way, what's this guy got? He's got the dropsy. What is dropsy? Anybody know? Dropsy is retaining fluids. I think the modern medical terminology would call it edema, when like your extremities swell, like your feet and your legs swell, and holding water in your extremities. It could be in the torso, but it's retaining fluid. And in some instances it's very bad, and apparently this guy's case was bad. So Jesus said, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? They didn't answer, verse 4. Then he heals the man, and he again challenges them with their hypocrisy. That if they have an ox or an ass fallen into a pit, they would straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day. They could not answer him again to these. Now, at least in this instance, they had enough good sense to keep their mouths shut. They didn't even try to make an answer to this challenge. But again, it's the same thing. So you couldn't use verse 5 to say Jesus is justifying situation ethics, because that's not why he said that. He's not, and did you notice Jesus didn't go on record as to whether he thought that was appropriate or not to pull the ox or the ass out of the ditch, out of the pit on the Sabbath day. Jesus didn't give his judgment as to whether that'd be okay or not okay. He's just showing their hypocrisy, and it even says that he doesn't use the word hypocrite here, but at least that's what he's trying to draw out from them. So again, be careful here, because some people, I've known of people who want to use these episodes that we've been looking at, where Jesus brings up, caring for animals, rescuing animals. They want to use that as Jesus signing off on or approving of situation ethics. A couple of things. One thing is, the first thing, I think most important, the only reason Jesus brings that up is to illustrate their hypocrisy. That's the main thing. That's why he's bringing it up. Second thing is, Jesus never said, in any of these accounts that we've read, Jesus never said, you would pull your ox up if he fell in a pit on the Sabbath day. And by the way, that's a good thing to do. I approve that. I sign off on that. I think you're fine to do that. He didn't. And so we've read 3 episodes now where in each one of them the same thing comes up. And not in any one of them did he say specifically, you would do well. Now on that first one in Matthew 10, he says it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. I think he was talking about his actions, not their hypocrisy, so to speak. Wayne?
He also said, have you not read? he doesn't cite a particular verse, but just have you not read that even David, what he did was not lawful, or the priests, as they would make sacrifices on the Sabbath day. So it wasn't from his own reasoning that he was using this. This was from the reasoning from the Scriptures.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And yeah, I think that's right. And that was actually in Matthew 12, the first verses of Matthew 12. And that's when at the end of that he said that he was the Lord of the Sabbath. I know the Sabbath. I wrote the Sabbath law, so to speak. But again, I think in that case when he referenced David and the showbread, he was showing their hypocrisy. They loved David. They didn't criticize David, but they criticized his disciples. All right. Okay, let's go to the fourth one now. Let's go to Matthew's account in Matthew 15. In Matthew 15, beginning verse 21. Then Jesus went thence and departed into the coast of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David, and my daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. And he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. And she said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Okay, so this miracle occurs at Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon would have been seacoast cities on the Mediterranean coast. This would have been to the northwest of Galilee, where Jesus was raised and where he did a lot of his preaching work. So if you can picture your map, Tyre and Sidon would have been on the seacoast northwest of Nazareth in Galilee. That's where this was. These people were not Jews. The people who lived there were not Jews. And so while he's in that region, doesn't say why he would be there. We don't know. That would be pure speculation why he would be there. But this woman comes to him who has a daughter who is demon possessed. Now this is this is a little bit challenging, I think. So she says, "Have mercy on me," verse 22, and explains the situation. He doesn't answer. He doesn't even respond to her. His disciples come and say, "Send her away. She's pestering us. Send her away." He answered and said, "I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." She keeps coming. She comes and worships him. "Lord, help me." He said, "It's not me to take the children's bread, cast it to dogs." Does that seem really harsh to you? When you read that, first of all, he just ignores her. And then secondly, when she comes and just worships him, begging for mercy, he says, it's not meet to take the children's food and cast it to dogs. But the implication is she's like a dog. You like that? How does that sound to you? And how do you explain it? Anybody want to take a stab at that? So the first statement that Jesus makes is true, right? At this juncture, he has just come to the lost, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. At this juncture, that was the focus of Jesus' work, right? Jesus was not working among the Gentiles. Now he was the fulfillment of prophecy to Abraham. In thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. He's going to serve as the blessing to the Gentile world. But at this juncture, Jesus' work, his preaching and his teaching is exclusively to Jews, right? And that's the way it was planned. That's the way it was. So he makes a true statement. My work is especially to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The one that I probably have the bigger problem with is verse 26, when he says it's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. Again, my guess is that we lose something in translation there a little bit, the tone of it, and maybe the implication of the way it's stated. Gary?
Well, verse 26, here the children would represent Israel, and the dogs, they would represent Gentiles.
Yeah, that's true. And it's just sort of a reiteration of what he said. I've been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's sort of a reiteration of, I guess my question is Jesus being unnecessarily mean-spirited and harsh in the response that he makes to this woman who is obviously very, grief-stricken at the condition that her daughter is experiencing. And so is Jesus being unnecessarily harsh and mean-spirited? Again, I think we know Jesus did no sin. There wasn't any flaw in him. And so our understanding of this has to be affected accordingly. And my guess is that there's something, in the way the English is worded makes it sound, I don't tell you, if I said that to somebody, they'd probably poke me in the nose. It sounds that mean. But I'm guessing there's something in the context or in just the way it was conveyed to the woman that was not as harsh as it seems in our English version. Wayne?
Yeah, the next verse, she acknowledges even the dogs.
Yeah.
She does not take it as a personal affront.
Yeah.
So it does not appear to be.
Good point.
Although it looks like to us.
Yeah.
In our culture, it would be.
Yeah.
But she doesn't take it that way, so it doesn't look like that.
I think that's helpful. She does not seem to be offended by the statement. Good point.
No, she realizes she's a Gentile.
Yeah.
She knows.
She knows that she's not of the sheep of Israel. That's right. Yeah.
She knows her state.
Okay. Good point. And so, to keep coming back, even when she's been initially rebuffed, Jesus commends her for the faith that she has. When she says, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Because she was persistent, because she demonstrated great faith, because she would not be turned away, Jesus rewards her. This is, by the way, here's a case of apparently the daughter wasn't even there. To the question that we've mentioned several times in our study, does the recipient have to have faith in order to receive the miracle? Not in this case. The daughter who was healed or who had the demon cast out, she didn't have any faith, and she apparently wasn't even at the scene of this interchange between Jesus and the woman. So, interesting case, I think. Interesting case. And I would just argue we cannot be put off by Jesus' answer because the woman apparently wasn't put off by it. Jesus was perfect. Whatever he said was a manifestation of perfectness, I guess, is the only way I can say it. He didn't do anything wrong here. He never did anything wrong. The woman did not seem to be offended, and she keeps asking for help. Okay. All right. One more. Mark 7. Mark 7, beginning at verse 31. And again, departing from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, he came unto the Sea of Galilee through the midst of the coasts of Decapolis. And they bring unto him one that was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they beseech him to put his hand upon him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. And he charged them that they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, so much more a great deal they published it, and were beyond measure astonished, saying, He hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. And so Here's a case of someone deaf and dumb. Cindy and I were talking just recently, we were talking about the Helen Keller story. And what was that woman's name? Anne Sullivan. Was it Anne Sullivan that taught her how to communicate? How hard that would have been. And in the case of Helen Keller, I think also complicated by the fact that she was blind. It really, the movie or the book and movie about that was called Miracle Worker. It wasn't a miracle, but it would have been just incredibly amazing that to be able to do that in the case of Helen Keller. In this instance, Jesus did that and did it immediately. So you got somebody who's deaf, they can't hear and they can't speak. How are you going to, what would you do for someone like that? Now apparently this guy was not blind, and so in our day and time you might teach him sign language so that he could communicate. But short of that, not much you can do. Not much you can do in this situation. Even today, that would be effectively an impossible situation to deal with. Jesus dealt with that, and he dealt with it immediately. Now, why did he do it? I've got a question for you that I don't think you can answer. Verse 33, he took him from the multitude, put his fingers in his ears, and spit and touched his tongue. Now, why did he do that? Again, I don't think there's any answer to that. Remember, the purpose of miracles is to serve as a sign. These miracles are intended to prove Jesus' identity as the Son of God. And so different things in different situations would have drawn attention to the healing. Because the healing wasn't just for a healing's sake. The healing was to prove who he was. And so Jesus might have done this just for the sake of those who were observing, so that it really emphasized that the healing, the cure, came from him, and it was miraculous. Wade?
Why did God tell Moses on one occasion to strike the rock and one occasion to speak to it? So I think the point is that Jesus was, he didn't have to even, he could have waved his hand, he could have thought it, he could have do whatever he wanted to, making spittle, whatever he wanted to do, he could still heal the guy.
Yeah. And I do think that the variation in the various ways that he did things probably served again to the ultimate purpose of being a sign, to provide evidence, to convince people of his identity. And in this case, you've got to conclude that it did the job. Verse 36, he charged them they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, so much the more a great deal they published it. I mean, this is getting out now. I mean, people are talking. These amazing feats that Jesus is accomplishing, these miracles that are inexplicable. There's no way you can explain away what is being done. It's a true miracle. And people are going to talk about that. And they published it abroad. And I think it's really interesting what they said in verse 37. Beyond measure they were astonished, saying, He hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. And so they're really, really impressed. Nobody has done this. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. And it is providing the evidence that the miracles are providing the evidence that they were intended to provide. And people are drawing the conclusions that they should, appropriately draw. If in our day and time, if someone could do the things that we've just read about tonight, so we've talked about 5 miracles. The first miracle was the withered hand. The second one was the woman stooped over for 18 years. The third one was the dropsy. The fourth one was demon possession, which we don't have anymore, but demon possession. And then this one, deaf and dumb. So if we had a guy in our community who could do, let's eliminate the demon possessed, because we don't have demon possession in our day. If they could do just the other 4 miracles that we've talked about tonight, legitimately do the 4 miracles, confirmably do the 4 miracles would you pay attention? I think you'd have to pay attention. And of course, there are fakers who try to do that and try to get people. And they deceive, unfortunately, they deceive a lot of people. And they have been exposed. They have been exposed as for the frauds that they really are. They've been exposed over and over again. They can't legitimately do it. But if somebody could legitimately do that, in one of our studies we talked about Jesus raising the dead. If somebody could really, literally raise a dead person, I mean confirmably raise a dead person, you'd have to sit up and take notice, wouldn't you? You just have to. And that's what's happening here. These people are really paying attention, and they're getting the point as to Jesus and his identity. Any additional thoughts? All right. We're just all but out of time. We've got one more lesson. I think what we're going to do, we've got one more lesson next week. And then on the week after, what I want us to do is spend the week after we've concluded our discussion of Jesus and miracles, I want us to talk about, we're going to do a sort of a final lesson as to why we believe that these kind of things are not happening in the world today. There are people who believe that they are, but we're absolutely certain that they are not. There are miracles of the type that we have been discussing that Jesus performed are absolutely not taking place in the world today. We need to be able to defend that truth. So 2 weeks from tonight, Lord willing, that's what we'll do. We'll take our final lesson next week, and then 2 weeks from tonight we'll make sure we're solid on the arguments that prove that there are no modern day miracles. Thanks, everybody.